Welcome to the Leela Life Show. I'm your host, Linda Andrews, and you've tuned in to the right place to up-level in your life and business. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Leela Life Show. This is your host, Linda Andrews, and I am here with the beautiful, amazing Flose LaPierre, and she is founder of Right to Heal, and she's amazing, and we're still trying to figure out where cosmically or etherically or whatever we're related. I don't know, but divineness has brought us together, and this episode is going to be power-packed. And perfectly unusual. So buckle up or whatever. Flose, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you here. So I was putting out my call for podcast guests, and you wrote me back asking if we could unpack, and I'm going to not try to recite perfectly. So if you want to say, but we're coming to the terms of death and also suicide ideation and life. I have to say life because I think that's a part of it. And some of these topics could be heavy for some listeners. So I urge you to, number one, check in with yourself that you feel in a safe space to receive this conversation. And if not, that's okay. Or maybe you'll come back to it. Or maybe you'll find that perfect moment that you've received what you needed and maybe not. I don't even know what's about to happen. So I'm just saying that as like some of these topics can be quite sensitive, and we want to be able to have these conversations because. So I'd love to hear from you why this is on your heart and mind and what brought you to the show today.
Yeah, first of all, love Linda. I love the show. So what brought me essentially is when you started talking about kind of your crisis doomsday state of mind on the podcast, and you just went there, and it was so deep. And I'd been thinking a lot about suicide ideation because it's something I've struggled with on and off for 10 years. Basically, when I was younger, I experienced a lot of pretty severe trauma. And as my younger self, I don't think I understood the concept of being able to kill oneself. So I often daydreamed about running away. And then about 10 years ago, I started getting more into the idea of, oh, wow, you could literally end your life. And then so that became the fantasy for me. So somewhere along the way, it switched. And so on and off for 10 years, it's something I fantasize about. And it sometimes happens when there's big changes in my life. Sometimes it's for something that is seemingly minor, but because I've experienced a lot of traumas, things that are seemingly minor usually are connected to things that are much deeper for me and are not minor and are not as surface level as I would like to think they are. But then recently I've realized, and you did this very well on the last episode, that the more that I talk about this feeling of suicide ideation, I brought it up in therapy, and she didn't freak out. She was just sort of like calm. She asked me questions about it. She was very curious. And then I went home and I just had a casual conversation with my husband about the fact that sometimes I fantasize about killing myself, or I fantasize about all of the ways someone can kill themselves. And I think to myself, well, I couldn't do it that way. I couldn't do it that way. And or if things get really hard, I just think, what if I didn't exist? And so that's kind of that space of mind that's brought me here. And in talking to Jesse about it, my husband, and he didn't freak out. He also acted with curiosity. He's very calm, and I throw a lot at him. And within the course of 2 years of marriage, he's just like, wow, but he's so gentle and he's so curious. And as a result, I spent an entire week and a half where I didn't, and sometimes every week I processed, like, what if I didn't exist? Like, this happens it's like part of my personality. And for a week and a half, it didn't come up for me. And I just thought to myself, oh my gosh, maybe talking about it more helps. And I talked about it in therapy. And so that's kind of what brought me here. long answer to that question.
Well, I see all these threads of connection, certainly to the work that you're doing, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, but we'll get there when we get there. And it's this like unlocking or freeing, it's like, this is bad, maybe, we talk about shadow, like rejecting this part of self, and then it's like, oh, and it's so interesting because I think a lot of people can relate, and maybe they can't even relate. They won't let themselves relate to what you're saying. as you're talking, I'm like, well, definitely had the thought of like, what if I wasn't here? Definitely contemplated all the different ways a person can die and
Mm-hmm.
like would love to know like the way that I'll die. And maybe not necessarily through the lens of how I would do that to myself, but isn't that curious that like exploring end of life just
Mm-hmm.
in general, right? And then the actual and this is something I was trained early on in psychology was like, do you have a plan, right? And then that and maybe you've been asked that question,
Mm-hmm.
and then that is a different part of the conversation. And I think that and you one of the questions you posed is like, which is leading me to explore my purpose, and I still don't have the answer. And this piece is also so important because I think that there's this almost like misnomer of like, I'll uh I'll find my purpose and then this will go away. Maybe, like, wouldn't that be nice? Or
Mm-hmm.
not. Like, why I say or not is we've made suicide ideation bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting anyone kill themselves, and I'm very sensitive to the conversation that we're having. And there's a lot of layers to what we're discussing, though, and being naturally curious about death. And I think actually one of our last conversations, this was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, we've talked about death on the show because it happens.
Right.
And this is really important. I had and I forgive me if you've heard this story, but I'm going to say it right now. It was
Go ahead.
important. This transformational moment with my dad, and I said, if
Mm-hmm.
we got killed right now, someone killed us both right now, like for whatever reason, it was a shooting in that moment. We would both be dead, and we both have our beliefs about afterlife or end of life, and that would happen. And everyone that's still here would be sad in theory that we
Mm-hmm.
aren't here anymore. And it was like this very intimate moment of like, oh, and even that could be such shadow, right? Of like the death piece. And I'm just curious for you, like a little bit of how it's been since all this is coming to light, and why what would you ascertain as like the importance of moving through it communicatively, maybe even through writing. I'm sure this will connect back to the work that you're doing, but like, why did things change?
Yeah, I think one of the things you talked about a little earlier is there is a difference, right? Like I've had to call a suicide hotline once
Mm-hmm,
before when I was on Lexapro for having, I had extreme panic attacks at one point to the point where I couldn't function.
mm-hmm,
And I had to be on medication. And that's as recent as 5 years ago.
mm-hmm,
And so I also was on sleeping medication because anxiety wouldn't allow me to fall asleep at night.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm bringing that up to say that at that point when I called the suicide hotline, I felt like I could easily swallow that bottle of
You knew the
pills.
difference in that moment.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm,
where I think that's important, the conversation we're having is almost like fantasizing about not existing, fantasizing about possibly killing oneself, which is suicide ideation, versus being suicidal,
mm-hmm,
which is like I have this exact plan. I'm going to swallow this bottle of pills, and like if I don't get help right now, this might happen.
mm-hmm,
Where I've been once in my life
mm-hmm,
about 5 years ago.
mm-hmm,
And then, of course, there's the active suicide where it's successful.
mm-hmm.
So, like the conversation we're having right now in terms of fantasizing about not existing, for me, you've said a lot, so I'm gonna
Yeah,
speak to
please unpack.
what
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
important to unpack for me. I recently wrote this essay about it. Like, well, if I kill myself, this karma, like, where does the karma of self-death? Because I grew up Catholic,
Mm-hmm,
and like that's insane. Like, you kill yourself, that's a major sin. You're burning in hell, and like that's. But then I think about like, is there a karma associated with it? So there's this big sense of responsibility
mm-hmm,
to live.
mm-hmm,
And there is a shame in that because if you don't want to live,
mm-hmm,
which is like life is the most important thing, is what our society tells us. And we don't have a choice over whether or not we exist. We just simply do. And this is the life we have. Um, there is some shame and some pressure attached to wanting to get to end your life, wanting to make things a little bit different. I think for me, what is different about verbalizing it is that I realize that I don't have to be ashamed,
mm-hmm,
that I realize it's not abnormal. Like
mm-hmm,
I've gone through some traumas, and people who go through sexual trauma commit suicide.
mm-hmm,
People who go through familial issues like I experience in family abuse will tend to commit suicide more than the rest of the population. So unfortunately, I'm not unique in this.
mm-hmm,
And so, like, acknowledging that and that I'm not a complete weirdo, I'm not crazy,
mm-hmm,
even if I feel like it at times, has for me been incredibly freeing. And even with the work of Right to Heal and writing and therapy, I still process it because I'm this human who has all this stuff that's been in here for who knows how long, and I'm healing.
Beautiful. This there's so many distinctions I'd like to make, but I felt like I got into the moment. This this the distinction even of making the choice and versus like the ideation, um connecting to religion and like the perceived shame of religion in some of these decisions, I think is fascinating. um I want this to land. I had a conversation the other day with a friend, and I said something along the lines of, we're always living and dying. And then the response was something along the lines of, not everyone believes in multiple lifetimes.
Mm.
And I said, no, no, no. It's irrelevant if you do. We're always living and dying. And then certainly when we zoom way out and pull in soul and pull in afterlife and pull in where you believe, right? I have such reverence for each human's belief system. And like, and when I was writing this episode, it was like life and death versus death and life, right? We're talking about death, but we're always living and dying. And that for me has helped so much because yes, there's seemingly a difference between end of life of physical form, seemingly. Isn't that curious?
That's been hard for me recently too, because there have been three important deaths in my three people who've died in my family
Hmm.
or within the close relationship in the last year.
Hmm.
And so the concept of like the end of this physical, like I cannot touch any of them,
Hmm.
but I don't believe they're dead.
Hmm.
So there's like it's like these weird, I don't know how to describe it because I want an answer, right?
Hmm.
Like this is an answer, like I can touch you,
Hmm.
but I can't touch them. So like there's this.
Well, and in that moment, even with my dad, it reminded me of like, I'm a big angel person. I don't know where
Mm.
they started coming. I don't see them. I sort of feel them. My godmother passed this year. I'm like, she's probably right here.
Yeah.
And for me, there's almost there's this like this infinite access on like a soul level that I feel, period. And I can feel that energetically with you, whether you're next to me or 30 minutes away or not here
Mm-hmm.
physically. Interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is, uh, I think we're taking the physical form maybe more seriously than we need
Too
to.
seriously.
I think it's
Yeah.
cool. Like I'm enjoying the ride.
Yes.
You know, cool. And it's so interesting because I think where I've landed with this, if I may share, is like, if we're all God or in the image of likeness of God, or even, in the non-dual traditions, what we would be all seen, right? There's oneness. Can I be in life looking at everyone from that lens? Either if it feels too provocative to say we're all God, because that will offend many,
Mm-hmm.
can I say we're all in the image and likeness of God?
Mm-hmm.
And many of certain religious backgrounds are not living from that space. And I would say many, if not all of the teachings are actually saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to get into this unless you want to. Uh,
I'm like already on the right.
yeah, but it's like we quickly get into a world where it's as divisive as it can get, and yet it gets more divisive. These are all the things that are leading me to actually be like, you're not in the image or likeness of God. You're not God. We're so separate. And I'm going to cling to that as every bit of me can prove. And I'm going to be in the world showing how separate we are all the time. And it's like that's been a jarring experience for me personally, because and I think there's a consciousness piece of this conversation, obviously. And there's much from the trauma lens that I think is worth unpacking. And for how long and at what What at what cost before we are really able to take that next step? And that next step, if this feels from like a religious lens jarring, or the opposite, right? No religion, jarring, like you're welcome to substitute the language that you can meet
Mm-hmm.
this thought at. But I
Mm-hmm.
really, for me, that's been like the keys to the kingdom of this sort of next level. And I would say it's like the allowance of really tapping into such curiosity. Can it all be okay? And can it come to like personal responsibility? You brought up karma. That's interesting to consider the karmic piece of this, even if it's just within this lifetime. Like this doesn't need to be this mind-blowing taboo thing. So I'd love to hear
I'm
what's streaming for you.
as you're talking about that, the thing that's popping up for me is oneness. So
Mm-hmm.
like I grew up with the idea that we're made in the image of God as well, just growing up Catholic and having a lot of really, Christian, Protestant, Presbyterian in my family, Baptist, Methodist, and like Haitian Methodist, which is like super Saiyan Christian. So like, but then like as myself now, I don't consider myself religious, but I
Mm-hmm.
consider myself really spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I've been exploring like, what do other people believe? Even the Tai Chi we did together, like there's a belief in
Beautiful.
oneness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so the concept of oneness really resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think about it in terms of like even trees and how connected the trees are and the fact that they talk to each other through their root system and through fungus.
Mm-hmm.
And
Big up to the mycelium.
yeah, yes, I'm glad you remember the name of the fungus. Um, that to me is like that single tree that you see, the part of the tree that you see, first of all, is like a small percentage of what that tree actually is. And that one tree is connected to an entire system of trees that look and don't look like it. And it's looking out even for the young seedlings and little trees coming up. And actually, I just learned that trees will kill off the seedling if the soil doesn't provide enough nourishment for a new tree,
Like if it's not going to
if it's not
survive.
going to survive.
Wow.
Yeah, which is just like, so there's even oneness in every aspect of nature. And
Mm-hmm.
I often see human beings reflected in nature, and seeing oneness in nature, seeing war in nature, seeing beauty in nature,
Mm-hmm.
it reflects what exists for me in like this human existence. And so I see oneness through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, if I can see myself in the image of a dog
Mm-hmm.
or a cat, and I do, I think that's why I'm so connected at times, is I see myself in so many of these beautiful living things, energetic things, because that's all I am. I'm energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that resonates for me. And I think to criticize religion, institutionalized religion that I grew up with, Christianity in particular, does us a disservice, to not allow us to question and to not allow us to see ourselves as God because it's blasphemous.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a disservice,
Mm-hmm.
because I think if we did, maybe we would care for ourselves a bit more and each other.
It's so I've been sitting with this lately. It's like the kingdom of heaven is here now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this could be a jarring thing to say, and for all these reasons that I don't feel like needs to be gotten into. What I would like to get in, because we all know what they are,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the kingdom of heaven is here now. Okay, you're not religious, sub in whatever feels like the equivalent of the kingdom of
Heaven is
heaven. Yeah,
here.
heaven is here. How do I act in the world when heaven is here? And this is like part two, I think, of the keys. Because if this is heaven, I don't know, I'm curious. Like, what does life feel like if this is heaven? How do I act? And this is the challenge that I put myself to every day, is to like move through heaven today.
I love that. Actually, one of the churches I sometimes do attend here is in West Palm, and it's
Mhm.
Providencia.
Mhm.
And it's because of how Keith, the pastor, preaches. And he has preached about heaven being here. And I think it's even in the Bible.
Mhm. It
He
is.
like he interpreted the scriptures so differently than I'm used to it being read.
Mhm.
And I fully believe in that. And I also think for me, I talk about my spirit moving me.
Mhm.
And it's like this idea of like, oh, if I want to walk around barefoot, right? Usually there's a voice that says, Flows, do this.
Mhm.
And sometimes I listen to it, and I can tell when it's a good voice
Mhm.
versus where it's like, oh, something else. It's a whole, um, but like there's a voice that says like, just take off your shoes, it's raining, and you really like a barefoot walk. And like I do that and it leads me somewhere. Or like connect with Linda and like it leads me somewhere. Or just getting a random email from someone or connecting and deciding to follow up in a way that feels authentic with my spirit. That to me is like the concept of heaven on earth. And like treating people kindly and with compassion, and treating creatures with kindly and with compassion, treating myself, which I think like this whole conversation about like the death of the old self, which I think is part of my suicide ideation as well, is like, how can I kill off these versions of myself that I don't like and start to create these versions of myself that could exist in this heaven? Maybe it's not finding purpose, but it's just like being a little bit better each day.
Yeah, it's the bet. Can I do my best today?
Yeah.
Can I do my best today? We're in these micro moments.
I love that you use that.
Yeah, the best this moment, right? And I don't know. Sometimes I think I have like a weird mind, but
you do. It's awesome though.
Yeah, these micro moments.
It's weird because it's not like the norm. It's not. I couldn't go to a factory farm and pick up. That's why I always tell people, I'm like, she's a genius. Just talk to her. When I talk to you, you literally shift paradigms for me. Like I'm not. It's not flattery for me. That's a truth. And like I'm not the only one. Like Sarah, my sister-in-law, she feels similarly. Like you shift paradigms, and for me, it's always for the better. So your mind is beautiful in the sense it's powerful.
There's this I received that. Thank you. And I think that genius is in all of us.
Yeah.
So I see it in you.
There you go. Yeah. Shifting hair.
We got right to here, you're doing it.
Thank you, Linda.
These micro moments, if I like to reduce things sometimes in ways that are digestible. So if I have a micro moment and I can be from 0 to 100, that's the scale our mind can get. And I don't know how many micro moments are in a day, but multiply it. It's a lot. 0 to 100, right? Can I do my best? And maybe my best is 80. Awesome, right? Like that thought for me is so much freedom. Because if in my micro moment, I want to take a nap, I want to cuddle with the dog, I want to do nothing, I want to do tons of things, whatever. It's like, it kind of doesn't matter. And I think this life and death, these cycles of life and death, these parts of myself, I'm looking behind you at the dry brush, right? The parts of yourself that are slying off, right? To become anew as many times as you want to, it's just so beautiful. And this to me is the freedom. And I don't know, I think the shame piece of probably some of these pieces of the conversation is worth addressing. Because for so long in this example, right, it was like I couldn't talk about it, right? And I think sometimes, and I think we may share this, but I couldn't talk about it is because the sense making hasn't been done. I don't even know what I would be talking about. One side could be the shame, but the other side could literally like not be the language. Like I didn't talk about what I went through until I talked about it because I was like, oh, I just went through that. When I was in it, it all felt really normal. And I'm referring to sort of the depths of my own dark night of the soul within the pandemic, but I'm having trouble landing this, talking about death and life within the context of the many times this happens. This could happen for a person every day or every micro moment. I think, and I've said this before, this is the secret to marriage because you're always new, and I've gotten sensitive, like, please don't put that projection on me. I'm a new human in this micro moment. Oh, wow. Like, yeah, so much freedom. And it frees the other person from their stories. It frees the other person, being myself, from my own stories, right? And I think that the tough part in this is when you feel like the other person's not picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, I love what you just said about marriage, because I was just thinking, Jesse and I were just having this discussion maybe 2 nights ago, where he feels like I move so fast. And I do. Like I have a million, I'm sure we all have a million thoughts in our heads, but have a lot of things I want to do. And usually, if it's something I'm excited about or that's aligned with me, I go for it right away.
Mm-hmm.
So he will feel like he's still catching up with flows from yesterday, where I'm like, here on this flows. And like sometimes it's been more conversations about like commitment and like the vows we made to each other. And what does that mean? Because I don't believe in marriage in like the institutional sense either.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that monogamy works. Well, it works for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that it works for everybody. And it's not always something I've been interested in. So it's led to some really interesting conversations. And for me, it's like the best I can tell you is in this moment, this is how I'm feeling
Mm-hmm.
about you. In this moment, this is the desire that I have. That's all I can offer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's freeing for me. And I don't know if it's all the way freeing for him. We'd have to bring him in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because certain systems like marriage, there's an expectation that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so all we can have are these small moments where we're making decisions, I think, that are best for us and maybe for the people we love, if that's the way we want to move through life. But that's been a game changer. And like when you like talked about it in your email, I was like, yes. Like, yeah, that connection, that affirmation, that confirmation was really like phenomenal for me with
Mm-hmm.
where I am in my life because I do change constantly. Like I'm so different than I was last year, and I have no idea who I'll be tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think one side of it, there has to be a piece of this that we have to talk about the F word here.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's a piece of this that I think um, it's like these undefined energies that are fear based that like I could die in a car accident tomorrow, so does it really matter if we're monogamous tomorrow if I'm dead tomorrow?
Mm.
In a weird thought,
Mhm.
okay? Like maybe monogamy will always work. Maybe it won't,
Mhm.
right? It's like there's a freedom, and when it doesn't work, it would actually, I would imagine at that inflection point it'd be working, whatever the decision would be,
Mhm.
right? But it's like, where this really came to light for me? This is weird, but have you watched The Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston? I got a trial to Apple
No.
TV. Okay. I watched this movie, funny enough, going to a woman's conference right before the pandemic kicked off, and I binge watched it. And it was like the veil lifted. I was like, oh my Lord, I took on the energies of like the fear of cheating from all these other forces. And I saw through it and I was like, they paint the guy as this, they do this, both the women are hot, they're perfect. All this, and I'm like, it's just too much. Like, I gotta be perfect, I gotta be fit, I gotta be this, I gotta be that, and then he'll love me and want me forever, and we'll be monogamous, and we'll stay. And then he'll cheat on me, and then my heart will be broken, and I've been cheated on. And I mean, it's like it's too much. And I just saw through this all so much, and I was like, oh wow, there's some programs that are being
Yes.
implanted that may have a lot of fear and in
Gosh.
charge that like when you sit down and say like I'm monogamous with you today, we'll see how I feel tomorrow, like there's like freedom and you both can jive with that. But when we're like in the idea sphere of, and we're using monogamy as an example, you could use
Right. It could
any,
be
it could be anything.
changing the bed sheets.
Yeah, it could really be anything. And education. I mean, we could talk about any system that
Yeah.
may feel like it could use some adjusting, including changing the bed sheets.
Yeah.
Uh, I think maybe to land this point is around some of the energies that can you be in integrity with yourself, with truth, and connecting with that, and speaking to that and embracing change. I see the other side happen where it's like the divorce, and then it's like I believe in polygamy, and monogamy will never work, and all the statistics why, which could also be true. Anything could be,
Absolutely.
right? But are you in check with yourself and what you need, or are you like taking the millions of projections from everyone else?
And I think honestly, that life for me, that's a life lens. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I love my partnership with Jesse is
Mhm,
no matter what I'm talking about, whether it's this idea I have about a writing workshop,
mhm,
there is this desire to explore it with
mhm,
me. Because I do feel like we're pre-programmed to behave in a lot of ways. It's
mhm,
how I don't do well in corporate environments in the way that they exist.
mhm.
And so I've been freelancing for the last 3 or 4 years. And for me, that might mean walking a dog. It might mean copywriting. It might mean, could mean a bunch of other things.
Mhm.
But for me, it's like, how can I exist in a way that is true to who I am in this moment? And a lot of systems, which I get, because in order for a system to thrive, it needs some structure.
Mhm.
Uh, but I don't believe many of us fit into the current structures and systems that exist. And so I want all of us to be little anarchists in the ways that we can, to try to say, well, this doesn't work for me, but this might work for me.
Mhm.
And to move on from there. And I think if we did that at every single capacity, I think the world would be significantly different. I think about that even when there's like a server who's not good.
Mhm.
I'm like, well, maybe the server doesn't actually want to be serving. Maybe
Mhm.
they'd rather be in the park playing the guitar, but
Mhm.
they feel they have to have this job to pay their rent,
Mhm.
which to me is like a misalignment. And it's like something within our system's broken, that this person is forced to do something they don't want to do and can't be their authentic self. But
Mhm.
like, where do they
Well,
go?
and something in the system, I mean, predominantly is financially in the
Yes.
system, right? And I think about this all the time. I am not educated on UBI, universal basic income, and every single like political, economic, da 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 da. Da, but I do believe, and hear me loud and clear when I say
Mm-hmm.
this, that wouldn't it be amazing if instead of being in fight, flight, or freeze because you can't pay your rent, that you knew you can have all your basic needs met through
Yes.
money. However that looks like, I could care less how it looks like. We have water, we have air, we have nourishing non-GMO soil dense food,
Mm-hmm.
and we have money that covers our basic living needs. That's the world that I'd like to be a part of, and I believe we can have that for 8 billion. I believe we could have it for 10 billion. I believe we could have it for 100 billion humans. And I don't know if we'll ever see those numbers, or if I get hate email and spam and delusion, whatever. But that's this critique of our current financial system. Can we talk about the role of stress and the
Mm-hmm.
role of, we're keeping people, oh, that stress state is the fear state,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're not accessing or processing clarity. We're getting a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just thinking, even if I bring it back to the conversation of suicide ideation for me, when I'm in that state, it's because I feel like I can't live. I'm stuck. I cannot live in the way I want to live. There's some sort of fear of uncertainty in the future,
Mm-hmm.
and like some sort of need is not going to be met. And maybe it's easier to just not exist. Maybe that's really dramatic. But I think even with folks who are struggling with depression or panic disorder, like, what are their needs that are not being met? And like, what if those needs are met and they can actually tap into some of the nervous system stuff
Mm-hmm.
that is perpetuating this anxiety and this other stuff? And maybe that world will exist one day.
It
I don't
will.
know.
I'm in 100% certainty
Yeah.
that it will exist, and I see glimpses of it. Before the show, Flows and I were talking about timelines,
Mm.
and I believe that as we
Mhm.
all step into healing, that we also decide can only be done by the self, uh, is is access to shifts. And when I'm saying healing timelines, it's just like a different outcome than what your past would have you perpetuate as the future, because you've
Mhm.
made a shift, and the shift could be in healing, and it could be healing and making amends and forgiveness. I mean, there's a lot there. Um, Gosh, this is so good. You just said that with the suicide ideation around, I feel, I'm taking these words
Mhm.
and making them now, but like hopeless, maybe helpless. I
Mhm.
don't want to be here. And recently in West Palm, we had a moment where, we had water issues, and I felt some of this, and I
Mm.
felt such intense anger, and I felt like we're not getting to the heart of the issues. And if our air is filled with 70% pesticides,
Mm.
what the fuck else is?
Right,
And
and you
who's
can't drink
talking
our
about it?
water.
And how many people on our 10-person committee is talking about this? And it's just such insane bullshit. And this is a little bit of like maybe the anger, or maybe not. Maybe it's a little bit of truth, and being willing to be like, hey, we got a big issue. We got a big issue, and we need to look at this. But why am I talking about this? Because there can be feelings of hopeless, and then there can be feelings of hope,
Mhm.
and all the ways it can change. And in that can be inspiration.
Mhm.
And you were talking about the voice, and that voice could be God, could be higher self, could be intuition.
Mhm.
Okay, language matters to the receiver. Um, but I find that that tipping point from hopeless to hope is with some space, and then usually some action, and then in all that can be a lot of freedom. That I think if you are in the hijacked state of the hopeless,
Mhm.
when you can access that is really powerful. So people that may be finding themselves in hopeless, I think you have some tools that can
Mhm.
help bring in some hope.
Yeah. I
You
have
like what I did
definitely, I
there?
love what you did there. Time for my plug. Definitely writing. And I mean, it could be one of the ways is my workshop. But this is something you can do right at home with a notebook from the dollar store and a pack of pens from the dollar store. The physical act of writing on paper to kind of slow your mind down, get you to really process and recognize all of the stuff you have up here.
Mhm,
Even for me, when I practice this, when I'm feeling usually like, oh my God, I don't want to exist, the first place I go is my notebook.
mm,
And a lot of the times when I'm writing, I'm like really writing. Maybe I'll start out slow, but then it gets aggressive and all of these emotions are coming out. And sometimes the words are very big. Sometimes the pages get ripped up. And then once I'm done, it's an exhausting process. And I can often will look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was holding so much in this little body, in
mhm,
this little mind, and I just needed to get it out. And usually that feeling of getting it out, maybe it's just catharsis, I don't know what it is.
mhm,
I start to feel better. It doesn't mean I have solutions to
mhm,
that, to whatever's causing the problem, but then I can always go to therapy. I
mhm,
can say I had these really serious emotions. Here's either something I've written down or just being able to talk about it now with more language
mhm,
because I've spent time writing it. The other thing writing is really good for when you're feeling in that state of hopelessness is it's information.
mhm,
So we have so many thoughts that, come in and out of our brains. There's so many vibes and energies that we experience day in, day out, and we don't spend time analyzing them. So oftentimes for me, the issue is, oh, I'm not analyzing, and I'm analyzing for me is helpful. Maybe it's not for others, but I tend to take things and really just break them down in my head and look at them and see what's happening. I use the writing as evidence.
mhm,
Flows, you're feeling like this because of this.
mhm,
And I didn't exactly realize I was doing the timeline thing you talked about, but I like when something happens and I behaved in a way I would have rather not behaved,
mhm,
when I write about it, I change the outcome.
mhm,
I write how I would have liked to act,
mhm,
which to me is action. It
mhm,
didn't happen, but it
mhm,
happened really
mhm,
because I'm saying it did.
mhm,
And then of course there's tons of like breathing techniques and other tools you can use to help heal yourself and process that hopelessness. But I also do think you have to make life changes.
mhm.
And it is by starting with some of those micro moments and micro steps.
Yeah, like the make a new choice can happen now.
Absolutely. I love that you have that in your
Yeah,
kitchen.
it was, I don't even remember what the first inspiration was. Oh, it's actually funny. It was that there were cups being placed there that I didn't like.
Oh.
And so that make a new choice was to like not put the cups there.
Mm.
And then it's like this mantra that fills the house, and it probably serves me, I'll speak for myself, it serves me a million times over, and it's the reminder to always make this new choice. But I really, I think what you're talking about, it reminds me of EMDR a little,
I've
because
done EMDR.
yeah, so you're going in EMDR, and many practitioners will take you into the traumatizing moment, and you'll process that moment as is. But to me, I'm curious about this, anyone that's an expert, is like, can you go into the moment and change the timeline? And what you're talking about in the writing, and writing how you would have preferred to act, um, if I'm saying that right, or
Hmm.
what you would have done now, with more information, it's can you be in this reprogramming? I've mentioned Lacey Phillips before. She does these reprogramming exercises where she's literally taking you back to these dark spots, shadow, inner child, and you're rewriting these scripts. And then we watch this completely change in the physical world. And when you're saying like it didn't happen, but it did, if we can never go back to the past, it did happen the new way.
Hmm.
Right. And it's like your whole system recalibrates, and now you're in a
Yeah.
different space.
Actually, I feel like this must be, I have done EMDR, so I know what you're talking about. And I'm sure like the woman who performed it would have a lot to say. But what this is bringing up for me is Sex with Emily Morse. I love her podcast. And she recently, well, maybe it's an old one. Sometimes I watch, listen to things
Mhm,
from 3, 4 years ago, where she had this therapist come on, or she's a therapist as well, but they talked about breakups.
mhm,
So what happens is because our brains are trained to survive, which I'm sure you know, but our brains are trained to survive. And so when a negative thing happens, we hold on to the negative
mhm,
because we'll remember, oh, this cup poisoned my brother. Therefore, I will not touch it. And like it triggers, something. And so we don't do this thing anymore, but we tend
and
to.
almost overcompensate maybe.
Right. And so we tend to do something when something negative happens. Like with a breakup, we'll be like, oh my God, they broke my heart. And we'll tell the story to everybody who'll listen. We'll tell it to Linda, tell Linda's neighbor, we'll tell it to Lily, we'll tell it to everybody.
And then,
And then it just reaffirms it. And sometimes in the case of someone ghosting you where you don't know what happened,
mhm,
what the women recommended is to just make up a story.
mhm,
He's like, it could be something terrible happened to them, or it could be they had another family. Just make up a story and it closes the chapter in your brain.
mm,
And I was like, wow. And instead of, because then you're not reliving the negative thing or the
mhm,
negative thoughts or adding on or projecting feelings, you just give it a conclusion. It's sealed, it's done, and you move on. I
mm.
was like, maybe that's why I started doing that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Right?
You're closing the chapter. And
Yeah.
well, Flows, this is so good. I think we could talk for so long. I'm curious if you want to, first of all, mention how everyone can find you and engage in these Right to Heal workshops. I'm a huge believer in pens and paper. I love
Yes.
pens a lot. And good paper, but or any paper and any pen works too. But but the power of the writing, and I don't have enough of the language to talk scientifically what's happening. I just know I've read a lot about a lot that happens. So there's certainly the science if you want to go down the rabbit hole as to why, to back it up. And if you just trust your intuition and you're feeling called, Flows, where can people find you?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm loving this process too of learning what writing does. And
Mhm,
it slows your brain down. So it's a mindfulness exercise, but
mhm,
then it affirms neurological pathways and can help you form new ones at a
mhm,
certain age, because I think there gets to a certain point where it's more difficult. But it's just wonderful. I mean, I love it. And if you just want to talk to me about it, you can find me on Instagram at Let It Flows Poet. Or you can just go to my website, which is righttoheal.us, and it'll redirect you to letitflows.com because that page doesn't quite exist yet. And then just click on heal and you can register for a workshop. But if you DM me or email me at letitflows@gmail.com, I'll be happy to talk about my workshop and talk to you and see what, if I can help in any way.
Awesome. And I'd love if you would share a prompt or a cue that someone could get started with their own writing to heal if they're feeling so inspired to
Mm.
write right now, if you have that
Yeah.
accessible.
I mean, I'll just come up with something right now. One of my favorite things to do is to go on walks. So
Hmm.
what I would recommend is, if you'd like a good prompt, find a nice notebook, a nice pen that you really enjoy. I'm pretty sustainable, so I like to get good ones that are, paper that's been recycled and all that good stuff and that I feel confident with. Go for a walk. I tend to walk barefoot, especially if I'm feeling a little off emotionally, and just start to take, and don't take your cell phone, just take your notebook and your writing utensil if you feel safe, and just start to tune in to like the sounds that you hear. Tune into your feet, how they feel on the ground, and if there's a park that you feel safer doing that in, or on the grass. And then just sit down and write down how you feel. And
Hmm.
it sounds silly, and maybe you might think this is stupid. I don't really feel any particular way. Then maybe write about the sounds, write about the flower that you saw, a color that really stood out to you, and then just allow your subconscious mind to just take you where it wants to take you, and just keep writing for maybe 5, 10 minutes. Who knows? But again, the time doesn't matter because you don't have a phone with you. Fill up a whole page, and then if your hand's not too tired, if you're not used to writing, you might get cramped. Just kind of stretch your fingers out and then try to fill up a whole new page. Don't use any punctuation. Don't care about how things are being spelled. Just write and just start that way. And then as far as really specific prompts, I have a nice long list.
Hmm.
So if you want a prompt, definitely just get in touch with me, or different
Awesome.
prompts, get in touch with me. And the ones for my workshops are typically creative and visual, and Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you guys, a lot to unpack. I hope this ignited whatever it needed to ignite within you, and we'll see you next week on the show. Have a beautiful day. Thanks again, Flose.
You're welcome.
This podcast episode was recorded with the intention of opening up the dialogue around suicide ideation for those of you that may be having thoughts like that, as Flose so intimately shared, knowing that there are practices and resources to pull yourself out of that. As she mentioned, once she was able to say, you know, I think about killing myself sometimes, how that really took away that deep feeling and that deep desire. And not forever, right? But it created some space for her. And although she may not identify with suicidal, but has these thoughts, right? And differentiating between, are you going to act versus do you have these thoughts? It's a very complex and sensitive subject. Since the recording of the episode, like I mentioned, I've lost a friend to suicide. And I think that this is just really important to understand some of these warning signs, some of the tendencies, and, you know, the ability, if you're in the struggle, being able to ask for help. And if you know someone that is going through this, being able to recognize these signs. You can get certified in mental health first aid. One of my loved ones was struggling, and that was the first call I made, was to a friend of mine who is certified in mental health first aid, and just asked her, like, what do I do? So whether you're thinking of making that decision, or you have a loved one in your life, if you have a loved one in your life, being able to recognize those signs. And if you're contemplating this, knowing how many people, even if it doesn't feel like this, even if you feel so alone, that love and care for you so deeply, and that would do anything for you to help you get the support that you need. And I say that with my whole heart. You know, it's devastating to receive the news that we had gotten. And this particular friend had been on a challenging journey the past several years. But I would have, you know, if I would have gotten that phone call, would have figured out who to call and who to help. So many nonprofits, so much support from the mental health awareness arena, and you know, coming back to some of the basics of self-care practices, tapping into your faith, your belief system, your purpose for being here on earth, being alive, is so critical. We live in certainly some challenging times. You know, personally, I face this on a regular basis where there can feel overwhelm or anger. And, you know, I really do the work to move the emotions. I do the work to heal this past trauma, so much trauma. I mean, I could write a book on my traumas, and I know every single human could. So we take this very seriously, and thanks for tuning in. I hope this episode was supportive and, you know, opening, you know, a portal of something that if you're struggling with, maybe you felt like you couldn't even talk about it, and maybe you will find out that maybe you're not alone in that. And if you are contemplating that decision, just knowing that there is help, call someone that you need the call, you know. And there's a lot of life to live. There's a lot of potential and hope and change and opportunity and shifts that are available to create the world that we all want to live in. And that's what gets me up every day. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. Much love. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Leela Life Show. Be sure to share, like, and comment. Tune in next week. And if you're not already a member of the Leela Life Collective, you'll want to be. So take a look in the show notes and be sure you sign up today. Have a beautiful day.